it sees naval cooperation with India as very important for French interests. So they do a series of exercises. A couple of years ago, when we had done a major naval exercises, the French had brought their aircraft carrier for that exercise. And the two countries have signed a logistics support agreement. They now do an annual defense dialogue. France has now participates in the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. It is participating in the Indian Ocean Rim Association, is trying to involve India more and more in the Indian Ocean Commission, which France had taken the initiative to set up. And the fusion center, information fusion center that India has established in Gurugram for information on white shipping. France is an active participant and has a presence there. So, in terms of its own interests in the Indian Ocean, in the broader Indo-Pacific, France sees India as an important partner, and that's why there is also a trilateral India-France-UAE mechanism, and there is a trilateral India-France-Australia mechanism.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Good evening, I'm Surya Gangadharan, and this evening on the Gist, we're going to look back at Narendra Modi's visit to Paris last week. Our guest is Mr. Arun Kumar Singh. He was India's ambassador in Paris not so many years ago. So welcome, glad to have you.
Thank you, Surya. Good to be with you.
So some of the commentary post Modi's visit suggests that Paris has replaced Russia as India's most trusted partner. What's your take on this?
Well, it has certainly been a very successful visit, and the India-France relationship is indeed a very important relationship with growing level of trust for both sides, deepening partnership in many strategic areas of cooperation in defense, space, civil nuclear. But, I would not go so far as to say that it will replace the Russia relationship, because each relationship stands on its own. And the two are complementary. Russia has been a long-standing partner for India, a strategic partnership where there is a level of trust that started from the time of the Soviet Union, and later, after some hesitation in the new post-Soviet Union Russia in the early 1990s, the strategic partnership was started in 2000. And since then, Russia has given political support to India in the international context, including at UN Security Council. It has continued to supply high technology defense items. In several instances, they've been able and willing to give us technologies that has not been available from elsewhere. For example, they gave us the nuclear propulsion for our submarine, Arihant, which we could not get from anywhere else. And also they have given us the S-400, the missile defense system, which again is recognized as a cutting-edge, high-technology defense system, which is important for India. So there is that dimension of the partnership. And recently, in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when Europe cut down on its purchases of oil from Russia and started picking up oil from the Gulf countries, which was India's traditional source, for its own reasons, then India had to turn to Russia and buy more oil from Russia. And the oil purchases from Russia went up significantly. Of course, that helped Russia because it was able to market its oil, but it was also useful for India. So that's one dimension. But we have to keep in mind that now there are some question marks about what happens to Russia's capability depending on how the Russia-Ukraine conflict plays out. What will be its impact on its economic capabilities, its defense production capabilities, its access to leading technologies, its ability to produce high technology items in defense? What will be its dependence on China? And that has increased as the distance between Russia and US and Europe has increased. Russia is getting more and more dependent on China, has given more supplies to China, energy and other supplies. Of course, many argue that Russia, for its own reasons, would not like to depend on only one country, China. It wants to keep its options, and that Russia and China are in competition in Central Asia. But that having been said, I mean, there would be question marks, and Indian policymakers would have to keep this in mind that what will happen next time there is a crisis in India-China relations? Where will Russia be placed? So, in the past, we've had no cause for discomfort, but you have to raise these questions about the future. Now, similarly, in the context of France, since 1998, even earlier, but especially since 1998, the relationship has gone in a positive trajectory. The strategic partnership with France was established in January 1998, before we did it with any other country.
Yeah.
And although we did our nuclear tests in May 1998, while Russia criticized India but opposed sanctions against India, and the other three permanent members of the Security Council, UK, US, and China, criticized India and led the world for sanctions against India. France did not criticize India and oppose sanctions against India. And since then, through if you look at space cooperation, defense, civil nuclear cooperation, France has been an important partner. But then we have to keep, and then France is useful for India to try and also influence processes that happen in Europe, which would have a bearing on India. So to that extent, they are complementary, but France cannot replace Russia. And also, France has its own relationship with China. It's
Yeah,
heavily
exactly.
linked to China in the economic sphere, in investments. And recently, President Macron had gone to China, and he said that France wants to strengthen relations with China, does not agree with the US approach on China. So where would France be placed if there is an India-China issue that crops up? Those are again question marks that we have to keep in mind.
So, in the Security Council, since Russia is more and more in China's pockets, at least that is the perception, and France has its own take on China. In that sense, it's good to have the US there as a kind of a support force.
No, absolutely, Surya. So, if you look at India's comprehensive national interests, clearly, US then becomes India's most important partner.
Yeah,
US is India's leading trading partner, trade being at $191 billion. Trade with France is $12 billion. Trade with Russia is broadly of the same level. It has increased recently
yeah,
because of the oil imports. If you look at investments, US companies have invested more than $54 billion in India. But what is important is that Indian companies have invested more than $40 billion in the US and have a
yeah,
presence across all 50 US states. So there is no matching figure for either France or for Russia. Or if you take the Indian origin diaspora, they're more than 4 million strong in the US. And now they're heavily integrated in US society. The vice president is a person of Indian origin. They're leading members in the administration who are persons of Indian origin. CEOs of major US companies, Microsoft, Google, Adobe, IBM, Starbucks, FedEx, these are all persons of Indian origin. So that level of engagement at the societal level, economic, technological level, there is no matching, engagement with either France or Russia. But the challenge with the US, as with any power, but especially the US, because its decisions have consequences for everyone, including India, that they will take decisions based on their own interest and based on the political compulsions of their leaders. So
yeah,
at times they will take decisions which will, not be in consonance with our interests. Now, at that time, India will have to take action to preserve its interests. So sometimes you may need the partnership with Russia to preserve your interests. Sometimes you need to leverage the partnership with France. Because while France is a part of the broader Western system, is a member also of NATO, because France wants to sustain and project autonomy of its decision making, very often it takes policies that are different from the US. It had
yeah,
opposed the US intervention in Iraq in 2003. And if you remember at that time, the US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said that in all US military bases, the French fries would no longer be called French fries, they would be called freedom fries, because they were reflecting a certain level of anger. So that
yeah,
gives us an option to also partner with another country, the broader Western system, that can be supportive of India when India doesn't agree with any particular US policy choice. And in August 2019, when we had taken action on Article 370 in terms of our own constitutional processes, China had tried to move the UN Security Council against India. And at that time, France was in the lead, supported by the US, to block China's action. So it's useful for us to build as many partnerships, especially if we want to maintain the autonomy of our decision making in a multipolar global context.
Interesting. So, in your view, what does France want from us? What do they see in us?
You know, in 2018, the French president had come to India. And in a public comment, then he said that he would like India to be France's main strategic partner in this region. And that he would like France to be India's main strategic partner in Europe. So, you know, France sees itself as a major global power. You know, it is a P5 member. It has traditionally had influences in Europe. It has been influential in West Africa. When I was serving in France as ambassador between 2013 and 15, I could see that European processes could move forward only first when France and Germany agreed on the direction and the mechanics. And then when there was a Franco-German tandem, others sort of came in behind that. Now, what has happened is that with the developments on Russia, Ukraine, and the enhanced transatlantic unity and growing role again that US has come to play in Europe, France's influence in Europe has come down because many of the Central and East European countries are not in agreement with France's articulation related to some of the global issues. Similarly, France's influence in Western Africa has also come down. Although France is one of the countries, aside from US, India, Russia, China, who organize a summit with some periodicity with the African countries. Now, given that, when France wants to maintain a sense of its being a major global power, a relationship with India becomes important. And also, France is a resident power in the Indo-Pacific. There is a French territory of Réunion, where 40% of the population is of Indian origin. They have a territory in Mayotte. They have a physical presence in Djibouti. They have a military presence in UAE, and in the Pacific Islands, New Caledonia is a French territory. So with that, France has a very large exclusive economic zone and a presence in the Indian Ocean region. So in that context, it sees India as an important partner. It sees naval cooperation with India as very important for French interests. So they do a series of exercises. A couple of years ago, when we had done a major naval exercises, the French had brought their aircraft carrier for that exercise. And the two countries have signed a logistics support agreement. They now do an annual defense dialogue. France has now participates in the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. It is participating in the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Is trying to involve India more and more in the Indian Ocean Commission, which France had taken the initiative to set up. And the fusion center, information fusion center that India has established in Gurugram for information on white shipping. France is an active participant and has a presence there. So in terms of its own interests in the Indian Ocean, in the broader Indo-Pacific, France sees India as an important partner, and that's why there is also a trilateral India-France-UAE mechanism. And there's a trilateral India-France-Australia mechanism. And in addition to all this, given the confidence in the relationship, history of defense partnership, the more France can sell to India, the more money they make. And that works for them. And it keeps their industry going, keeps employment going, helps them develop more technology. So it's of advantage to them also.
Yeah. Some of the opinions and reports appearing in the French media also referred to various negative things in India, Is this a very big constituency there, or it's not? I mean, politically,
You
it
know,
doesn't matter.
look, I think there are differing opinions in different countries. All democracies have different shades of opinion. And
Yeah.
there are shades of opinion in France which are critical of some of the developments, or as they perceive the developments in India. But the France has its own problems. 10% of French population are Muslims,
Yeah,
migrants
yeah.
from North Africa. 50% of the people in French jails are Muslims. So that's the kind of problem they have. And you have seen the recent riots that have taken
Yeah, yeah.
place in France. There were similar riots in 2005. So in the French suburbs, there is a segregated population of immigrants that lives there, that feels itself deprived, that doesn't feel itself as mainstreamed in the French system, feels itself to subjected to racism. And so
Hmm.
there's a huge problem there. And again, if you remember, in 2015, there were major terrorist strikes in Paris. And these were people who had gone from France, from Brussels to Syria to be with ISIS and then had come back to carry out these strikes. So these people do feel themselves alienated from the French state and the challenges that the French society and state itself faces. All societies have their challenges, and I think while certainly they can learn from each other's best practices, each society needs to focus on addressing its own challenges, more impactful way.
Now, you mentioned this briefly earlier in response to my first question. So let me ask you to go into a little detail on the main pillars of the relationship, the India-France relationship. What is it that it stands on?
I think India-France relationship stands on three main pillars, and you can add the other dimensions. You can add trade, investments, climate change issues where we are cooperating. But the three main pillars are defense, civil nuclear, and space. And in defense, historically now France has been an important partner. We had the Mystère aircraft from France, the Mirage series from France. And if you remember, during the Kargil conflict, we had used the Mirage aircraft very effectively to hit the
Yeah.
bunkers that the Pakistan army had set up in the high mountains there. Um, and then also the submarines, in the whole Scorpion series of submarines, where we have built in collaboration with France 5 already, and the sixth one is under construction. So France has been an important partner. So when you have a strong partner in defense, there has to be an element of trust. They have to be willing to partner with whatever level of technology sharing that happens. And India has to be confident that that partner will not let it down at a moment of crisis.
Yeah.
And I think there is that sense that whenever we've needed the support, that has been forthcoming. The second area is civil nuclear. And again, there is a history to it. You will recall that in 1974, when we had done our nuclear tests, at that time, US had stopped supplies to the Tarapur nuclear reactor. And under their own law, they could not supply fuel anymore. But the reactor needed to be kept open. There were safety
Yeah.
issues, plus they had a commitment to keep the reactor running. So they had brought in the French to provide supplies for the nuclear reactor. And then, so there's a certain relationship around that also built up. So since then, there has been a partnership with France in civil nuclear technology, and that's important for India. Also, France in Europe is the country that has the maximum capacity in civil
Maximum.
nuclear technology. More than
Yeah.
50% of the energy is generated by nuclear power. And then third area is space. In Europe, the space capacity, all other countries also have some technologies. UK has, Germany has, Italy and Spain has, but it is largely concentrated in France. The European space program under the Ariane program is concentrated in France, and India has launched more than 20 satellites through the French presence in Kourou in French Guyana. For a time we couldn't launch satellites which were higher than 2 tons, and those we had launched
Yeah.
from France. And France has also launched satellites from India, and we've done joint satellites. So, in the critical areas defined in the strategic partnership in Europe, France is our most important partner, because with Germany, the trade with Germany is much larger than the trade with France. But Germany has kept itself focused on intra-European processes and or in the periphery of Europe. It doesn't really have a geopolitical heft outside that sphere. And with the
Interesting.
UK, we've had challenges on India-Pakistan issues, or we've had challenges in terms of activity of the Indian origin diaspora in UK that they don't take effective action against. So in Europe, the most important partner that India has is France. And with Brexit having happened, more and more companies, Indian companies that were investing earlier in UK for supplies or for dealing with continental Europe, with Brexit feel that it is useful for them also to have a presence in continental Europe. So some go to Germany, some to Netherlands, and many are going to France. So that is certainly the reason why the French relationship becomes an important relationship for India.
But the civil nuclear thing hasn't really taken off, isn't it? Is it because of cost or technology, or what are the issues there?
So the construction of nuclear power plants in collaboration with France after the civil nuclear deal was done globally in 2008 hasn't really taken off. Although after the US had led the world to get exemptions from International Atomic Energy Nuclear Suppliers Group, the first agreement we had done was with France on 30th
Yeah.
September 2008, before the one we did with the US. I think the problem there has been several on both sides. So many companies find that the civil nuclear liability law that we brought in has become a challenge for suppliers. Although in the case of France, that challenge is a little less because the French company is a public sector company.
Yeah.
So a public sector company is able to deal with that far better than a private sector company. But the French company earlier was Arriva, and Arriva went bankrupt and had a lot of difficulty. So then that was inherited by EDF, a French entity. So EDF has now been engaged in negotiations. And from what I understand, there are issues related to cost of the power that will be generated. So the two entities, EDF on the Indian side, on the French side, and Nuclear Power Corporation of India in the Indian side, are in discussion to see how more work can be done in India. And there could be more industrial collaboration related to nuclear technology in India so that the cost comes down. So those discussions are going on, and hopefully that will be resolved in a framework of some time.
I just want to touch on the defense thing again. The Some of the references to the Rafale and the engine and so on, these got dropped from the final text that came out. Does that suggest there is an issue with technology sharing, and some of those old issues are kind of come back again?
So don't have a visibility into why those were not specifically mentioned, but the fact remains that the Defence Acquisition Council said that there was an acceptance of necessity. So that is
Yeah.
a start of a process. It's a signal from India that we have decided that we will look at getting these aircraft and or partnering in this engines. But it is a start of a process. After that, the two companies have to get into discussion. They have to explore pricing and other aspects, spares, maintenance, the overall cost. So there's a lot of work still remaining to be done. Similarly, in terms of the engine technologies, for what I see in terms of the statements and what has come out in the public domain, there are two aspects. One is a cooperation between Safran of France and DRDO for developing jointly a new engine which will be used in the advanced medium combat aircraft
Hmm.
for India. And so that's a innovation project, and it takes time, and they have to negotiate and decide how to make it work. And but separately, Safran and HAL have formed a joint venture to produce engine for helicopters that will be used in India. So the processes have started, but they take time. So I think even though some of them may not have been specifically mentioned in the joint statement, there is still a signal that cooperation in those areas have been initiated, and now the entities involved have to get into deep dive discussions on how to operationalize that.
And the French don't come cheap; they are very expensive.
I think nobody comes cheap in defense. So ultimately, that's why the policy in India right now is to see how much more we can do in India and use the market power we have in terms of how much we are importing of defense equipment to make sure that more and more production in India is done in India, more and more technology transfer happens, and that, if possible, we also export to third countries. Nobody comes cheap. It's ultimately a question of what is the best you can generate for yourself, including in terms of the level of technology that you're getting when you buy, and then later what is the kind of technology transfer that can take place for us to build our own capacities.
Just last question: is this the first time, to your knowledge, that the French may be willing to share and develop a jet engine with another country?
I don't have visibility on whether they have done with another country or not. I haven't seen any report of their having done so. But certainly with India, this is for the first time they are doing it. But not just, if you look at, for example, with the US, for the first time, the US has now agreed to share G414 technology
Yeah, yeah.
with India. Now, that's a technology of an existing engine for the Mark II, Tejas Mark II aircraft that India is looking at producing. And whereas in the French case, the decision is to partner for development of a new engine. So that's why the two are complementary. You can use one and the other to generate some level of competition from your partners in terms of how much they are willing to share with you. But both these developments indicate that at the global level, there is a recognition that India's technology absorption capabilities have increased. And at the global level, countries like US and France see India as a very important partner and are willing to do more and more with India.
On that note, Ambassador Arun Singh, thank you for that perspective. Great as always talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And for those of you who joined us on this conversation, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media, including Twitter. Thank you very much. Good night.